The massive space station hung in the void like a metal city, its lights blinking against the darkness of space. Inside its halls, beings from 100 different worlds walked together. Some had blue skin and 3 arms. Others looked like giant insects with crystal wings. A few were just clouds of gas that floated in special suits. They all had one thing in common. They were part of the Galactic Confederation, the biggest government in the known universe. Ambassador Zethkari stood in front of a huge window, looking out at the stars. His purple skin was smooth like polished stone, and his 4 eyes could see things that human eyes never could. In his hands, he held a data pad that glowed with soft blue light. The information on it made him shake his head in disappointment. "Another primitive world," he said to his assistant, who looked like a walking tree with silver bark. "Planet designation 7 Delta Minor. The locals call it Earth." The tree-like being, whose name was Vorthak, swayed slightly as he spoke. "What? Makes this one special enough for review, Ambassador?" Zethkari touched the data pad, and a 3-dimensional image appeared in the air between them. It showed a blue and green planet spinning slowly in space. The survey drones found it 3 months ago. It has a large population and decent mineral resources, but look at this. The image changed to show small metal objects flying through space around the planet. They were crude and simple compared to the sleek ships that filled the Confederation's fleets. "They still use chemical rockets," Zethkari continued. "Chemical rockets. Can you believe it? They burn fuel to push themselves through space like savages." Vorthak's branches rustled with what might have been laughter. "How primitive. What about their energy sources?" "Nuclear fission, mostly. Some fusion, but barely any. They're at least 2,000 years behind our youngest member species." Zethkari swiped his finger across the data pad, and new images appeared. They showed cities filled with tall buildings, but compared to the floating crystal cities of advanced worlds, they looked like children's toys made of stone and metal. "Their society is even worse," the ambassador continued. "They're divided into nearly 200 separate governments. 200! They fight wars over land, over resources, over ideas. They can't even agree on how to share their own planet, let alone join a galactic community." The hologram shifted to show a map of Earth with different colored areas marked all over it. Red zones blinked in several places, showing active conflicts. The survey team counted 47 active military conflicts happening right now on this one small world. Our psychologists say this level of internal fighting usually means a species will destroy itself within a few hundred years. Vorthak moved closer to study the display. "What about their biology? Any interesting traits?" "Nothing special. They're carbon-based, oxygen-breathing bipeds. Average lifespan is less than 100 of their years. No natural armor, no telepathic abilities, no enhanced strength or speed. They can't even see in the dark properly." Zethkari scrolled through more data. "The medical scans show they're actually quite fragile. Their bones break easily, they get sick from simple bacteria, and they die if their planet's atmosphere changes by just a few degrees." "Sounds like a waste of survey resources," Vorthak observed. "Exactly. The only reason we're even discussing them is because of their numbers. The drones counted over 7 billion individuals on the planet. That's a substantial population, even if they're primitive." Zethkari closed the hologram and looked back out at the stars. In the distance, massive cargo ships moved between solar systems, carrying goods and people across impossible distances in the blink of an eye. Peaceful worlds traded knowledge and resources without conflict. Advanced civilizations had solved problems like hunger, disease, and war thousands of years ago. "The sad thing is, they're probably not that different from how we all started," he said quietly. "Every species goes through a primitive phase. The difference is, most learn to work together before they develop weapons that can destroy their whole world." "Have they reached that level yet?" Vorthak asked. "Oh, yes. They have enough nuclear weapons to turn their planet into a dead rock several times over, and from what our behavioral analysts can tell, They're not smart enough to avoid using them. Zethkari turned away from the window. It's actually quite tragic. They have art, music, literature. Some of their scientific theories show real creativity, but they're too violent and divided to survive their own adolescence as a species. The two beings walked through the corridors of the station, past meeting rooms where representatives from dozens of worlds made decisions that affected billions of lives. Everything was peaceful and orderly. Conflicts were resolved through discussion and compromise. Resources were shared based on need and contribution. It was a system that had brought peace and prosperity to most of the galaxy. So what's the official recommendation? Vorthak asked as they approached the council chambers. Non-contact protocol. We'll leave them alone and check back in a few hundred years. If they survive and manage to develop interstellar travel on their own, we'll consider opening communications. If they destroy themselves... Zethkari's shoulders moved in what his species used as a shrug. Well, it won't be the first time. They entered the council chambers, a vast circular room with seats for representatives from all member species. The meeting was already in progress, with dozens of different voices discussing various matters of galactic importance. Trade agreements, scientific discoveries, territorial disputes between member worlds, all the normal business of a civilization that spanned half the galaxy. When Zethkari's turn came to speak, he activated the holographic display again and gave his report. The assembled representatives listened politely as he explained Earth's primitive technology, violent society, and divided government structure. A few asked questions about the planet's resources or strategic location, but most seemed bored by yet another backwater world that wasn't ready for contact. The vote was quick and unanimous. Earth would remain on the non-contact list, monitored by automatic probes but otherwise ignored until its inhabitants either grew up or eliminated themselves. It was a decision the Council had made hundreds of times before for hundreds of other worlds. As the meeting moved on to other topics, Zethkari made a final note in his report file. Species shows typical pre-spaceflight aggression and territorial behavior. Recommend monitoring for self-destruction within 300-500 local years. No strategic value for Confederation interests. He closed the file and forgot about the little blue world and its warlike inhabitants. After all, the galaxy was full of important matters that required attention from advanced civilizations. There was no time to worry about every primitive species that might or might not survive its own violent nature. None of the assembled representatives could have imagined that this same primitive, divided, aggressive species would one day save their entire civilization. They couldn't have predicted that humanity's apparent weaknesses, their chaotic nature, their refusal to give up, their ability to find new solutions to impossible problems, would prove to be exactly what the galaxy needed. But that discovery was still years away. For now, Earth remained just another entry in the vast database of primitive worlds, spinning quietly around its yellow star while its people fought their small wars and dreamed their small dreams, completely unaware that they had just been judged and found lacking by civilizations they couldn't even imagine. The irony was perfect, though none of them knew it yet. The same qualities that made the Confederation dismiss humanity as hopeless primitives were exactly the qualities that would one day make them the galaxy's greatest hope. Sometimes, the Council would learn, being advanced and civilized wasn't enough. Sometimes you needed something else, something wild and unpredictable and absolutely refusing to admit defeat. Sometimes you needed humans. The station continued its slow orbit, and in the distance, Earth kept turning, its people completely unaware of the judgment that had just been passed upon them. They went about their daily lives, fighting their wars, solving their problems, and slowly, steadily, preparing for a future that would surprise everyone, including themselves. 3 years passed since the Confederation had written off Earth as another failed primitive world. During that time, everything changed. Not on Earth, The humans continued their small wars and slow progress toward space travel, completely unaware they were being watched. The change came from outside the galaxy, from the dark spaces between the stars where nothing was supposed to live. The first reports came from the outer rim territories, places so far from the galactic center that news took weeks to travel back to Confederation space. Entire star systems had gone silent. Not destroyed, silent. Their communications simply stopped, and when scout ships were sent to investigate, they found nothing but empty space where planets and civilizations used to be. Commander Thelvas stood in the command center of the Confederation's newest battleship, staring at a tactical display that made no sense. His species, the Chronari, were known throughout the galaxy for their logical minds and strategic thinking. They had never lost a war because they could always predict what their enemies would do next. But this enemy was different. "Show me the Kepler sector report again," he ordered his tactical officer, a young Altarian named Kexalon. The holographic display shifted, showing what remained of a solar system that had once housed 12 billion beings across 6 inhabited worlds. Now there was nothing but a few dead rocks and a strange, dark structure that pulsed with unfamiliar energy. The structure appeared approximately 6 days after the last communication from the sector capital, Kexalon reported. "Our long-range sensors detect massive energy signatures, but we can't identify the technology. It's unlike anything in our databases." Thelvas studied the display with growing unease. In his 40 years of military service, he had seen weapons that could crack planets and shields that could stop stars. But he had never seen anything that could completely erase a civilization without leaving traces of the battle. "What do the science teams think?" he asked. "They're calling them void devourers, sir. The preliminary analysis suggests they're not from our galaxy. They seem to be some kind of collective organism, part biological and part mechanical. They consume matter and energy to build more of themselves." The tactical display updated again, showing red markers spreading across the outer rim like a disease. Each marker represented another lost system, another dead world, another few billion lives that had simply vanished. "How many systems have we lost?" Thelvas asked, though he already knew the answer would be worse than he wanted to hear. 47 confirmed, sir. Another dozen have gone silent in the last week. At this rate of expansion." Kexalon paused, running calculations on his console. "At this rate, they'll reach the core worlds within 2 years. Thelvas felt something. He had never experienced in his long military career genuine fear. The Confederation had faced rebellions, territorial disputes, even a few genuine wars with hostile species. But they had always won because they were more advanced, better organized, and smarter than their enemies. These void devourers were different. They adapted to every weapon used against them, learned from every battle, and grew stronger with each victory. "Sir, we're receiving a priority transmission from the High Command," his communications officer announced. The display changed to show Grand Admiral Morthek, the highest-ranking military officer in the Confederation. His usually calm expression was tight with stress, and his famous blue uniform looked wrinkled, as if he hadn't slept in days. "Commander Thelvas, I'm issuing Emergency Directive 7. All available ships are to report to their nearest military depot for immediate deployment to the Rim territories. We're implementing the Emergency Conscription Protocol." Thelvas blinked in surprise. The emergency conscription protocol hadn't been used in over 300 years. It allowed the Confederation to draft soldiers and resources from any member world, regardless of their development level or political status. "Sir, are we including pre-contact civilizations in the conscription?" he asked. "Everything, Commander. Every world, every species, every available resource. The science teams estimate we have less than 18 months before the devourers break through our outer defenses. After that, they'll have access to the core industrial worlds. If we lose those..." The Admiral didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the command center understood the implications. The core worlds produced the ships, weapons, and technology that kept the Confederation running. If they fell, It would be the end of galactic civilization. What about the worlds that aren't ready for contact? Kexalon asked. Some of them are still in their primitive development phases. We'll deal with that problem when we survive this one, Morthek replied grimly. I'm sending you the target list now. Your task force will handle the Sol system. Thelvas looked at his tactical officer in confusion. Sol system? I don't recognize that designation. Kexalon checked his database. It's a small system in the local arm, sir. Single star, 8 planets, 1 inhabited world. The local species calls themselves humans. They're classified as pre-contact primitive. What resources do they have that we need? Large population, over 7 billion individuals, substantial mineral deposits, and... Kexalon paused, checking the data again. Sir, they have an unusually high percentage of military-age individuals. Their society is highly militarized due to constant internal conflicts. Thelvas nodded slowly. It wasn't ideal, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The Confederation needed soldiers, and primitive species often made excellent ground troops once they were properly equipped and trained. Their lack of advanced technology was actually an advantage in some ways. They were used to hardship and fighting with limited resources. How long to reach the Sol system? He asked his navigation officer. 18 hours at maximum speed, sir. Set course immediately, and prepare the standard integration package. We'll need translators, basic medical supplies, and conscription documentation. As his ship jumped into hyperspace, Thelvas reviewed the files on humanity. They were indeed primitive by galactic standards, still using chemical rockets and nuclear fission for power. Their society was divided into numerous small governments that fought constantly over resources and territory. From a military perspective, they showed promise. They had developed nuclear weapons and various delivery systems, which suggested they understood the basics of strategic warfare. What the files didn't mention, because the Confederation's advanced. Sensors couldn't detect it was the one thing that made humans unique in the galaxy. Every other species the Confederation had encountered became more peaceful and cooperative as they advanced technologically. Humans were different. The more advanced they became, the more creative they got at solving problems that should have been impossible to solve. The Confederation was about to learn this lesson the hard way. Fleet Admiral Korvax commanded the integration fleet that approached Earth 18 hours later. His 300 ships represented more firepower than most civilizations could imagine. Plasma cannons that could level mountains, shield generators that had never been breached, and enough troops to conquer a dozen worlds. The plan was simple and had worked on hundreds of other primitive worlds. Demonstrate superior firepower by destroying a few military targets. Wait for the local government to surrender. Establish a colonial administration and begin resource extraction. Conscript the local population into labor battalions and ground troops for the war effort. Korvax had personally overseen 23 successful integrations in his career. He expected this one to be routine. As his fleet took positions around Earth, he activated the ship's external communication system and began recording the standard integration message. It would be broadcast in the local languages, explaining that their world was now under Confederation protection and that resistance would be futile. What Korvax didn't know was that humans had been watching the stars for decades, listening for exactly this kind of signal. Radio telescopes around the world had detected his fleet's approach hours before they arrived. Military commanders in every major nation were already implementing emergency protocols that had been planned for years but never tested. The integration was about to begin, but it wouldn't go according to the Confederation's plan. For the first time in their history, they were about to encounter a species that would rather fight an impossible war than accept an easy surrender. And in the war against the Void Devourers, that stubborn refusal to give up would prove to be exactly what the galaxy needed. The first plasma blast hit NORAD at exactly 0600 GMT. The mountain fortress, built to survive nuclear war, disappeared in a flash of superheated gas that could be seen from orbit. Within minutes, similar strikes eliminated military bases across the globe. The Pentagon, the Kremlin's military complex, China's Central Military Commission headquarters, all reduced to smoking craters by weapons that seemed to harness the power of stars. Fleet Admiral Korvax watched the destruction from his command ship's bridge with satisfaction. The humans' primitive radar systems had detected his fleet's approach, but their response had been laughably inadequate. Chemical rockets armed with nuclear warheads had been launched at his ships, only to be swept aside by point defense systems that could track and destroy 1,000 individual targets simultaneously. "Initial strike complete, Admiral," reported his tactical officer, a hegemony warrior whose species had been conquering worlds for millennia. "All major military installations neutralized. No enemy vessels detected in orbit. Local communications. Networks are in chaos." Korvax nodded approvingly. "Begin broadcasting the surrender terms. Standard integration protocol. They have 6 hours to respond with unconditional submission, or we begin targeting civilian population centers." The message went out in every human language, transmitted on every frequency their primitive communications networks used. It was the same message that had been broadcast to hundreds of other worlds, explaining that their planet was now under Confederation protection, and that resistance would only bring unnecessary suffering. What came back was not what Korvax expected. Instead of the usual frightened response from planetary leaders begging for mercy, the Admiral received hundreds of different transmissions from all over the planet. Military commanders, government officials, and even civilian broadcasters were all saying essentially the same thing in dozens of different languages. "Go to hell." "Sir," his communications officer said uncertainly, "we're receiving multiple response signals, but none of them appear to be official surrender documents. Most of them seem to be insults." Korvax frowned. In his experience, primitive species usually surrendered within hours of the initial demonstration. The destruction of their major military assets should have made it clear that resistance was hopeless. "Are their governments non-functional? Did we eliminate too much of their command structure?" "No, sir. We targeted military installations as planned. Their governmental and civilian infrastructure is intact. They're just refusing to surrender." This was unprecedented. Korvax reviewed the integration manual, looking for protocols to deal with a species that simply refused to acknowledge their defeat. The closest thing he could find was a section on temporary emotional responses to integration shock, which recommended allowing primitive species additional time to process their new situation. Extend the deadline to 12 hours, he decided. They need time to understand their position. But 12 hours brought more of the same. Then 24 hours. Then 48. Instead of surrendering, the humans seemed to be using the time to prepare for war. Confederation sensors detected massive movement of personnel and equipment around the globe. Major cities were being evacuated. Industrial facilities were being converted for what appeared to be military production. Most puzzling of all, the humans had stopped using their normal communication frequencies. Their radio traffic had dropped to almost nothing, replaced by a chaotic mix of signals that the Confederation's computers couldn't decode. "They're using some kind of encrypted communication system," the intelligence officer reported. "But it's not based on mathematical algorithms like normal encryption. It seems to be based on cultural references, historical events, and shared knowledge that isn't in any database." Colonel Sarah Chen crouched in the ruins of what had been Colorado Springs, studying the alien ship hovering over the city through a pair of binoculars that had been modified with components salvaged from a destroyed military satellite. The ship was beautiful in its way, all smooth curves and gleaming metal, but it was also a symbol of everything that was wrong with the current situation. "They think we're going to roll over because they blew up some buildings," she said to her second in command, a former Air Force pilot named Rodriguez. "They don't understand that they just pissed off 7 billion angry apes with opposable thumbs and too much time on our hands." Rodriguez grinned, despite the fact that they were hiding in a bomb crater while alien ships patrolled overhead. The engineering teams finished analyzing that wreckage from the downed scout ship. Turns out their technology isn't magic. It's just really advanced engineering, and if it's engineering, then we can figure out how it works, Chen finished. It was the same conclusion that resistance leaders around the world were reaching. The aliens had superior technology, but they had made a crucial mistake. They had underestimated human ingenuity. In hidden laboratories around the globe, scientists and engineers were taking apart alien technology with the same methodical determination. Their ancestors had used to reverse engineer everything from captured enemy radar systems to crashed meteorites. The alien plasma weapons were based on contained fusion reactions. Their gravity manipulation systems used exotic matter that could be replicated with the right equipment. Even their faster-than-light communications relied on principles that human physicists could understand, even if they couldn't duplicate them yet. The key word was yet. Dr. James Wright had been working on fusion power for 15 years before the aliens arrived. Now, locked in an underground laboratory beneath MIT, he was discovering that the aliens had solved problems that human science was just beginning to understand. But they had solved them in ways that were elegant and efficient, and therefore predictable. "Look at this," he told his team, pointing to a holographic display showing the internal structure of an alien plasma rifle. "They're using a magnetic containment field to compress hydrogen into fusion temperatures, but the field generators are standard electromagnetic coils, just made with materials we haven't seen before." His assistant, Dr. Lisa Park, nodded excitedly. "And if we can synthesize those materials using our particle accelerators, then we can build our own version. It won't be as efficient as theirs, but it'll work." Similar scenes were playing out in laboratories around the world. Chinese scientists in hidden bunkers were figuring out alien gravity manipulation. Russian engineers were reverse engineering alien armor materials. European physicists were cracking the secrets of alien power. Sources: the aliens had advanced technology, but humans had something more valuable: the desperate creativity that comes from fighting for survival with your back against the wall. Fleet Admiral Korvax was beginning to suspect that this integration was not going according to plan. 3 weeks had passed since the initial strikes, and instead of the orderly colonial administration he had expected to establish, he found himself dealing with the most frustrating resistance movement in Confederation history. The humans had no central command structure that could be targeted and eliminated. Instead, they seemed to operate as thousands of independent cells that struck without warning and disappeared back into the general population. They used civilian vehicles as weapons, turned their own cities into elaborate traps, and demonstrated a level of tactical creativity that bordered on insanity. Worst of all, they were learning. Every battle provided them with new alien technology to study and reverse engineer. Every defeat taught them new lessons about Confederation tactics and weaknesses. They were adapting faster than any species Korvax had ever encountered. "Sir, we have a problem," his tactical officer reported during the morning briefing. "The humans have successfully modified one of our plasma rifles. Intelligence reports suggest they're beginning mass production of hybrid weapons." Korvax stared at the holographic display showing grainy footage of human soldiers carrying weapons that looked like crude copies of Confederation plasma rifles. It should have been impossible. The technology was beyond their understanding. "How could they possibly understand our weapons technology?" he demanded. "Unknown, sir, but they seem to have an unusual talent for reverse engineering captured equipment. Our scientists estimate it should take them decades to understand our technology. They're doing it in weeks." The Admiral studied the tactical situation with growing unease. His forces had superior firepower and technology, but they were designed for conventional warfare against other spacefaring civilizations. The humans fought like nothing in the Confederation's experience, chaotic, unpredictable, and absolutely refusing to admit defeat even when faced with impossible odds. "Request additional reinforcements from High Command," he ordered, "and prepare the orbital bombardment platforms. If they won't surrender, we'll have to consider more direct methods." But even as he gave the order, Korvax suspected that traditional solutions weren't going to work on these humans. They had already proven they could adapt to anything the Confederation threw at them. The real question was whether his forces could adapt to them. In underground bunkers and hidden laboratories around the world, human scientists were asking themselves the same question about alien technology. The answer, they were discovering, was yes. Humans could adapt to anything, given enough time and motivation, and the aliens had just given them both. The liberation of Australia began at dawn on a Tuesday morning that would forever change the course of galactic history. Captain Marcus Rodriguez crouched in the pilot's seat of a spacecraft that shouldn't have existed, a hybrid creation built from salvaged alien technology and human engineering that represented 6 months of desperate innovation by the combined resistance forces of Earth. The ship looked like nothing else in the galaxy. Its hull was a patchwork of human titanium steel and alien metamaterials, welded together with techniques that made Confederation engineers weep. Its weapons were a mixture of reversed-engineered plasma cannons and modified human railguns that fired depleted uranium shells at relativistic speeds. Most importantly, it flew using principles that no alien tactical computer could predict because they were based on human flight patterns learned from studying everything from bird migration to atmospheric fighter combat. "All units, this is Freedom 1, Rodriguez spoke into his communicator, using the same calm voice he had once used to coordinate bombing runs over enemy territory back when humanity's enemies were other humans. "Operation Waltzing Matilda is go. Remember, these bastards expect us to fight like civilized species. Let's disappoint them." Around him, 47 other ships rose from hidden positions across the Australian continent. They were crewed by humans who had learned to operate alien technology through pure determination and trial and error, guided by instruction manuals, written by scientists who had figured out advanced physics by taking apart crashed alien equipment with hammers and screwdrivers. The Confederation's main forward base hung in orbit above Sydney, a massive structure that housed 10,000 alien troops and the command center for their entire Earth operation. It was defended by weapons that could destroy continents and shields that had never been breached by any known technology. Rodriguez studied the tactical display with the same methodical attention he had once given to enemy air defenses. The base was indeed formidable, but it had been designed to defend against attacks by other advanced civilizations using predictable tactics and technologies. No one had ever considered what would happen if it were attacked by primitives who fought like cornered animals. "Flight 2, begin your approach from Vector 77 Alpha," he ordered. "Flight 3, wait for their point defense systems to lock onto Flight 2, then come in from the opposite side. Everyone else, watch for my signal." The first wave of human ships approached the alien base using flight patterns based on wolf pack hunting strategies. They moved in seemingly random directions, but every movement was coordinated to confuse the alien tactical computers that were trying to predict their attack vectors. The base's defense systems responded exactly as Rodriguez had hoped they would. Massive plasma cannons swiveled to track the approaching ships, while point defense lasers began firing at targets that were moving in ways that violated every principle of civilized space combat. What the alien computers couldn't understand was that human pilots weren't trying to follow logical attack patterns. They were flying the way humans had always flown, by instinct, creativity, and sheer bloody-minded determination to get where they were going, regardless of what stood in their way. "Now!" Rodriguez shouted, and the real attack began. 30 ships, that had been hiding in the radio shadow of Australia's satellites suddenly appeared, moving at maximum acceleration directly toward the base. They had been waiting there for 6 hours, drifting in powered-down silence while their crews breathed recycled air and prayed that their jury-rigged life support systems wouldn't fail. The alien defense systems had been designed to handle coordinated attacks by large fleets using advanced tactics. They had never been tested against a swarm of small ships piloted by individuals who made their own decisions and changed their minds every few seconds based on whatever seemed like a good idea at the time. Commander Vextar watched the tactical display from the base's command center with growing alarm. The human attack was unlike anything in Confederation military databases. Individual ships were breaking off from their formations to pursue completely different objectives. Attack patterns shifted without warning. Some pilots seemed to be ignoring their orders entirely, chasing targets that had no strategic value. "Focus fire on their command ship," he ordered his weapons officer. "Sir, we can't identify which ship is their command vessel. They don't seem to have one." That was impossible. Every military force in the galaxy used centralized command structures. How could they coordinate an attack without a command ship? What about their communications? Are they using encrypted channels? "Sir, they're using open channels. We can hear everything they're saying, but—" The communications officer paused, looking confused. "Sir, they're not giving tactical orders. They're just talking to each other." Vextar listened to the translated chatter coming from the human ships and realized with growing horror that the communications officer was right. Instead of professional military commands, the humans were having casual conversations while flying through a space battle that should have required their complete attention. "Red Leader, you see that big gun turret on the left side? The one that looks like it's overcompensating for something? Copy that, Blue 7. Want to see who can take it out first?" "You're on, but I get to pick the next target." "Deal. Hey, Green Squadron, can you keep those fighters busy while we work on the main guns?" "No problem. We brought enough ammunition to party all night." It was insane. They were treating a life-or-death space battle like some kind of competitive sport. Worse, their casual coordination was proving more effective than the most sophisticated tactical computers the Confederation could build. The human ships swarmed around the base like angry insects, each pilot choosing their own targets and attack methods. Some used their plasma weapons to punch through armor plating. Others fired railgun rounds that punched clean through the base's structure. A few simply rammed their ships into critical systems, trusting their enhanced armor to protect them long enough to cause maximum damage. Within 2 hours, the most heavily defended Confederation facility in the Sol system was a crippled wreck, drifting through space. The human fleet had lost 14 ships, but the survivors were already forming up for their next objective. "All units, this is Rodriguez," the human commander transmitted. "Phase 1 complete. Time for Phase 2. Let's go pay a visit to their supply depot at Luna. I hear they've got some nice ships we could borrow." Admiral Korvax received the news of the base's destruction while reviewing casualty reports from resistance actions across the globe. The numbers were devastating. In 6 months of occupation, his forces had lost more personnel and equipment than most Confederation campaigns lost in years of fighting. "Sir, the humans have captured 3 of our heavy cruisers," his intelligence officer reported. "Long-range sensors show they're already modifying the ships with their hybrid technology." Korvax stared at the tactical display, showing red icons spreading across the Earth's solar system. Each icon represented a human force that was growing stronger and more capable with each passing day. They were no longer just resisting the occupation. They were actively pushing it back. "What's the status of our request for reinforcements?" he asked. "High Command has denied the request, sir. All available forces are being deployed against the Void Devourer threat. We're ordered to complete the integration with existing resources." The Admiral nodded grimly. The war against the Devourers was going badly for the Confederation. Entire sectors had fallen, and the enemy was adapting to every weapon and tactic used against them. The last thing High Command wanted to hear was that their integration forces were being defeated by primitives. But perhaps there was another way to look at the situation. "Get me a secure channel to Grand Admiral Morthek," Korvax ordered. "I think it's time to propose a different kind of solution to our human problem." Meanwhile, in the captured Confederation cruiser now designated Terra's Revenge, Dr. Sarah Chen was making a discovery that would change everything. The ship's computer systems contained detailed intelligence about the Void Devourer threat, including tactical analyses and battle records from the front lines. "Marcus, you need to see this," she called to Rodriguez, who was studying the ship's weapon systems with the enthusiasm of a child in a candy store. The tactical display showed the spread of devourer forces across the galaxy, and the picture was even worse than the resistance leaders had imagined. Entire civilizations were being consumed, their technology and knowledge absorbed into a collective consciousness that grew stronger with each victory. "Jesus," Rodriguez whispered. "No wonder they were so desperate to conscript us. They're losing." Chan nodded grimly. "But look at this. The Confederation's battle analysis shows that the Devourers adapt by studying their enemies' tactics and technology. They learn from every engagement and become immune to whatever defeated them before." "Sounds familiar," Rodriguez said with a bitter laugh. "That's exactly what we've been doing to the Confederation." "Exactly, which means—" Chen paused as the implication sank in. "Which means we might be the only species in the galaxy that can fight them effectively." The irony was perfect. The same qualities that made humans seem like hopeless primitives to the Confederation. Their chaotic nature, their refusal to follow logical patterns, their ability to adapt and improvise, were exactly what was needed to fight an enemy that learned from every conventional attack. Humanity was about to discover that their greatest weakness was actually their greatest strength. And the galaxy was about to learn that sometimes being advanced and civilized wasn't enough. Sometimes you needed something wild and unpredictable, and absolutely refusing to admit defeat. Sometimes you needed humans. The Void Devourer scout fleet arrived at the edge of Earth's solar system, expecting to find the depleted remains of a primitive civilization recently conquered by the Confederation. Their collective consciousness had analyzed thousands of similar scenarios across the galaxy, and the pattern was always the same. Advanced species conquered primitive ones, strip-mined their resources, and left behind broken populations that posed no threat to anyone. Instead, they found something that defied every predictive model in their vast shared intelligence. A species that had not only survived invasion by a technologically superior force, but had somehow turned the conflict into an opportunity for explosive advancement. The lead Devourer bioship, a massive construct of living metal and organic neural networks, paused at the system's edge to analyze what its sensors were detecting. The primitive world was supposed to be under Confederation control, but the energy signatures coming from the inner system suggested something very different. Human ships moved between the planets in formation patterns that the Devourer consciousness had never encountered. They were clearly based on Confederation technology, but modified in ways that seemed to violate several laws of physics. More puzzling still, the ships were operating in coordination with Confederation vessels, as if the two species were working together rather than in a conqueror-subject relationship. Deep within the bioship's neural core, millions of artificial minds processed this information and reached a conclusion that should have been impossible. The primitives had somehow defeated their conquerors and taken their technology. The Devourer fleet began moving toward Earth, confident that whatever had happened here would provide useful resources for their expansion. After all, they had consumed civilizations far more advanced than these humans could possibly be. Their adaptive capabilities had proven superior to every defense the galaxy could mount. They were about to discover that they had never encountered anything quite like humanity. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Confederation dreadnought, New Horizon, watching the approaching devourer fleet with the calm expression of someone who had spent the last 18 months learning to fight impossible battles. The ship had originally been named Subjugator of Primitives when it arrived to conquer Earth, but its new human crew had insisted on something more optimistic. "Devourer fleet count is holding at 12 ships, Admiral," reported her tactical officer, a former Marine sergeant named Williams who had learned to operate alien sensor systems through a combination of technical training and creative swearing. Estimated time to weapons range is 43 minutes. Chen nodded, studying the tactical display with the same methodical attention she had once given to materials engineering problems. The enemy ships were impressive. Each one was larger than anything in the human fleet, built from technology that seamlessly blended organic and mechanical components. According to Confederation intelligence, they were also nearly indestructible, capable of adapting to any weapon system used against them, which was exactly why Chen's battle plan didn't rely on weapon systems. "Signal all ships," she ordered. "Execute Operation Chaos Theory on my mark." The plan that Chen and her staff had developed was based on a simple observation. The Void Devourers adapted by analyzing their enemies' tactics and technology, then developing countermeasures. But they could only adapt to patterns they could recognize and understand. Human tactics, fortunately, were based on principles that no rational intelligence would ever consider using. "Mark," Chen said quietly. What followed was the most bewildering space battle in galactic history. The human fleet attacked using formations based on murmurations of starlings, flocking behavior that changed direction according to rules that had evolved over millions of years to confuse predators. Individual ships made decisions based on the behavior of their neighbors, creating patterns that emerged organically rather than being planned by any central intelligence. The Devourer Collective consciousness tried to analyze the attack pattern and found itself unable to predict what would happen next. Every time their algorithms identified what appeared to be a tactical formation, the humans would shift to something completely different. Worse, the shifts seemed to be based on factors that had nothing to do with military logic. One squadron of human fighters suddenly broke off their attack run to investigate an interesting-looking asteroid. Another group began flying in perfect geometric patterns that served no apparent tactical purpose but looked aesthetically pleasing. A heavy cruiser captain decided to ram his ship into a devourer vessel because, as he later explained, it seemed like the thing to do at the time. Dr. Lisa Park, now serving as the fleet's chief science officer, watched the battle from her position in the New Horizons laboratory and smiled with satisfaction. The weapons she had developed were working exactly as designed, not because they were more powerful than conventional weapons, but because they changed their fundamental operating principles faster than the Devourers could adapt. "Fire control. This is Park," she transmitted to the ship's weapons officer. "Switch to Configuration 7 Alpha on the main batteries." "Configuration 7 Alpha? Aye. What does that one do again?" "Plasma containment using magnetic fields modulated by recordings of Bach's Brandenburg Concerto No. 3. The harmonics should disrupt their adaptation algorithms for at least 90 seconds. It was insane. It was ridiculous. It was based on principles that no rational species would ever consider using in combat. It worked perfectly. The lead Devourer bioship shuddered as human plasma bolts struck its hull, each one tuned to frequencies that shifted according to musical patterns rather than mathematical ones. Its adaptive armor tried to analyze the attack and develop countermeasures, but the parameters kept changing in ways that followed artistic rather than logical rules. For the first time in their species' history, the Void Devourers encountered an enemy they couldn't understand. Commander Thelvis watched the battle from his position aboard the Confederation cruiser Redemption with a mixture of awe and terror. 6 months ago, he had been part of the fleet, sent to conquer these humans. Now he was fighting alongside them against an enemy that had consumed half the galaxy. "Human tactics are effective," observed his Chronari tactical officer, in the same tone he might use to say that gravity was influential. "They're completely insane," Thelvas replied. "That's why they work." On the tactical display, human ships were performing maneuvers that violated every principle of space combat Thelvas had learned in 40 years of military service. They were using their ship's atmospheric flight capabilities in vacuum, coordinating attacks using patterns based on Earth wildlife behavior, and employing weapons that change their operating principles according to aesthetic rather than tactical considerations. Most bewildering of all, they were winning. The first devourer ship died when a human heavy cruiser managed to ram a fusion bomb into its neural core while reciting poetry over the communications channel. The explosion sent shockwaves through the devourer collective consciousness as it tried to process the tactical implications of an attack method that had no tactical implications. The second died when a squadron of human fighters attacked its weapons systems using a coordinated pattern based on honeybee dances, guided by pilots who were making tactical decisions based on intuition rather than analysis. By the time the third devourer ship was destroyed, the enemy fleet was in full retreat. For the first time since their invasion began, the Void Devourers had encountered something they couldn't adapt to: the beautiful chaos of human creativity. The news of the human victory spread across the galaxy faster than light itself, carried by Confederation communication networks to every surviving world. For the first time in 2 years, the war against the Void Devourers had turned in favor of the Defenders. Grand Admiral Morthek stood in the Confederation's main command center, staring at the tactical display that showed human-led task forces pushing back devourer incursions across 3 different sectors. The primitives who had been dismissed as worthless just 2 years ago were now spearheading the galaxy's defense against its greatest threat. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet commander," his communications officer reported. The display shifted to show Admiral Chen's calm face, transmitted from the bridge of her captured Confederation dreadnought. Behind, her human and alien crew members worked side by side at control stations that had been modified with typically human practicality. "Grand Admiral," Chen said with the polite respect of one professional addressing another, "I believe you have a war you'd like us to help you win." The irony was not lost on anyone in the command center. 6 months ago, the Confederation had been trying to conscript humanity as expendable ground troops. Now they were formally requesting human leadership in the most important military campaign in galactic history. "Admiral Chen," Morthek replied. "Carefully, the Confederation formally requests Earth's assistance in our ongoing conflict with the Void Devourer threat. What terms would your government consider acceptable?" Chen's smile was polite and professional, but Morthek could see the steel underneath. "Full membership in the Confederation for Humanity, with voting rights proportional to our contribution to the war effort, reparations for the damage caused during your attempted invasion, and a formal apology for dismissing us as primitives." "Granted," Morthek said without hesitation. "All of it. What do you need from us?" "Everything you've got. Ships, troops, resources, intelligence. We're going to end this war, but we're going to do it the human way." As Chen's image faded from the display, Morthek reflected on how completely the galaxy's situation had changed. The species that had once been considered too primitive for contact was now leading the fight for galactic civilization's survival. But perhaps that was exactly what the galaxy had needed all along. Not more advanced technology or sophisticated tactics, but the wild creativity and stubborn refusal to give up that could only come from a species that had evolved to survive. By being too chaotic for anyone to predict, the war against the Void Devourers continued for another year, but the outcome was never really in doubt once humanity took charge of the galactic defense. Human-designed tactics and weapons proved consistently effective against an enemy that had adapted to every conventional approach. The final battle took place at the edge of the galaxy, where the last devourer stronghold was eliminated by a combined fleet, using tactics based on everything from migration patterns of Arctic terns to the mathematical principles underlying jazz improvisation. When it was over, the galaxy had learned a lesson that would reshape interstellar relations for millennia to come. Sometimes the most advanced solution to a problem is to find someone who doesn't know enough to realize it's impossible. Earth had indeed been just a backwater planet, but sometimes that's exactly what the universe needs.